Okay, I want you to picture something. Imagine a scene. It's straight out of an old black and white movie. We're in Washington, D.C., the late 1950s, maybe. There's a diplomatic party going on, you know, the type of room thick with smoke, the sound of ice clinking in crystal glasses, all these men in tuxedos muttering about the Cold War.
Right, the whole embassy circuit, very serious, very formal.
Exactly. And right in the middle of it all, there's this woman. And she is just arresting. She stops traffic. She's got these incredible high cheekbones, these heavy-lidded, intense eyes, a dress that's just perfectly tailored. She looks, and I mean this literally, she looks like Marlene Dietrich.
The perfect hostess.
The perfect hostess. Yeah. Smiling, making the right conversation, passing the canapes. But, and this is the thing, if you could somehow peel back that mask, if you could just get a glimpse of what was actually happening inside her head at that moment.
I know it wouldn't be about the dinner party.
Not even close. You'd find a mind that was just churning with some of the most terrifying, strange, and philosophically dense ideas of the entire 20th century.
And that's it, isn't it? That's the whole story.
That is the hook. That's the contradiction we're diving into today. The woman is Clarice Lispector. And for a very long time, she was sort of the secret password among writers, you know, a kind of cult figure. But today, she is seen as an absolute titan.
And not just in Brazil, where she's from. We're talking about a giant of world literature, the American translator Gregory Rabassa. And this is the guy who brought 100 Years of Solitude to the English-speaking world, so he knows what he's talking about. He actually met her.
Oh, wow.
And he said he was just flabbergasted. That was his word. He gave us this amazing description, and the one everyone quotes. He said she was that rare person who looked like Marlene Dietrich and wrote like Virginia Woolf.
I love that quote. I mean, it just captures the dissonance so perfectly, doesn't it?
It really does.
And we have a pretty massive stack of sources to get through to try and understand her. We're leaning heavily on Benjamin Moser's biography. It's called Why This World. It's just fantastic, really the definitive work.
Absolutely essential reading.
We're also looking directly at her major novels, things like The Passion According to G.H. and her last book, The Hour of the Star. And we've got a lot of the original criticism, you know, what people were saying about her when she was alive.
And Moser, in that biography, he makes this incredibly bold claim, and I think it really sets the stakes for our deep dive today.
What's the claim?
He says that he considers Clarice Lispector to be the most important Jewish writer in the world since Franz Kafka.
Whoa, okay.
Kafka.
That's putting her in the absolute stratosphere. That's the highest possible praise.
It is. It's a huge statement. But I think as we unpack her life and her work today, you'll start to see why he says that. Our mission really is to figure out how this refugee, a little girl fleeing the absolute chaos of the Russian Civil War, becomes known as the Brazilian Sphinx.
The Brazilian Sphinx, I like that.
We're going to look at how she completely revolutionized the Portuguese language. And we're going to try and get our heads around a life that swung so wildly between, this diplomatic luxury and this deep, almost mystical suffering.
Okay, so let's do it. We have to start at the very, very beginning because her origins are, they're incredibly traumatic. She's known as this icon of Brazilian literature, but she wasn't born in Rio or even in Brazil.
No, not at all. And you really can't understand Clarice, the writer, without understanding where Chaya, the child, came from.
Chaya, that was her birth name.
Chaya Pinkasivna Lispector, born on December 10th, 1920. And the setting is a small Jewish town, a shtetl called Chetelnik, in a region called Podolia.
Which today we'd say is in Ukraine.
Correct. But in 1920, forget modern borders. The region was a complete disaster zone. The Russian Empire had collapsed, the Tsar was gone, and the Russian Civil War was raging. It was just absolute chaos, anarchy.
And when we say chaos, we're not just talking about, a breakdown of government services. We're talking about brutal violence.
Oh, extreme and very targeted violence. This was the era of the pogroms. For anyone who might not know the history, a pogrom is basically an organized massacre of an ethnic group. And in this case, in that region, it was aimed at the Jews.
So the Lispector family, her father Pinkas, her mother Mania, and her two older sisters, they were living in the middle of a war zone.
A nightmare. The sources describe a landscape of just sheer terror. Armies, the Red Army, the White Army, Ukrainian nationalists, Polish forces, just freelance bandits. They were all sweeping back and forth across the territory. Villages were burned. There were mass executions. Starvation was everywhere. It was hell on earth.
And there's a particularly dark shadow that hangs over this period, specifically concerning her mother, Mania.
There is. And this is a very delicate subject, but it's absolutely crucial to the whole story, the mythology of Clarice Lispector. By the time the family finally escaped and made it to Brazil, Mania was paralyzed. Her health was just in a steep, rapid decline.
And biographers have speculated about the cause.
Yes. There's been significant and I think credible speculation that her health issues were trauma-related, specifically that they were the result of sexual violence of rape during one of the pogroms in Ukraine.
The sources are clear that this is unconcerned,
Yeah.
but the weight of that possibility,
Yeah.
that is an incredibly heavy burden for a family to carry in silence.
It's immense. And there's another layer to it, another piece of this family tragedy that directly involves Clarice.
Okay.
Clarice, or Chaya, as she was then, was conceived and born during this period of flight and terror. And there was an old folk belief, a superstition in Eastern Europe, that becoming pregnant could cure an illness.
Oh, no.
So there's a theory, which Moser discusses in his biography, that Clarice was conceived in a desperate last-ditch attempt to cure her mother of this creeping paralysis.
That's just heartbreaking. So she's literally born into the world with this impossible mission to save her mother, a mission that, of course, no baby could ever fulfill.
Exactly. And so from the moment of her birth, she's tied to this tragedy, and she carries the guilt of that failure for her entire life. It's a foundational wound.
So they know they can't stay. They have to escape.
They're desperate. In the dead of winter in 1921, they managed to cross a frozen river into Romania. From there, eventually, somehow, they get to Hamburg in Germany, and they get passage on a ship bound for Brazil.
Why Brazil specifically?
It was one of the very few countries that was still accepting Jewish immigrants at the time. A lot of doors in America and elsewhere were closing. So they arrived in early 1922. Clarice is just over a year old, and this is where the first great reinvention happens. To survive in this new world, they had to assimilate. They had to blend in.
Right. They couldn't be the Lispectors from a Ukrainian shtetl anymore?
No, they shed their old names like old skins. Pinkas became Pedro, Mania, the mother, became Marietta, and little Chaya, she was given the name Clarice.
It's like a magic trick, isn't it? A new name for a new life. But they didn't land in the glamorous postcard-perfect Rio de Janeiro, did they?
Not at all. They settled in the northeast of Brazil, which is a much poorer, much harsher region. First in a small city called Maceió, and then a bigger one, Recife, in the state of Pernambuco.
And you just have to imagine the sensory shock of that.
Oh, completely. I mean, think about it. You come from the freezing, gray, muddy landscape of Eastern Europe to the blinding, oppressive tropical heat of the equator. It's a world of intense light, of vibrant, overwhelming colors, and also of really intense, grinding poverty.
Yeah, the family was poor.
Very poor. Her father, Pedro, became a peddler. He sold whatever he could. The sources say he struggled constantly just to make ends meet. But the family's central tragedy, her mother's declining health, that continued to worsen.
Which leads to the first great trauma of her life in Brazil.
Yes. Her mother, Marietta, finally died on September 21st, 1930. Clarice was just 9 years old.
To lose your mother at 9.
Yeah.
And a mother whose illness was so wrapped up in the family's secret history and your own birth.
It leaves a void, and I use that word void very deliberately because that absence, that silence, that thing that isn't there, it becomes maybe the central character in all of her fiction. She's always writing into that void.
But even with all this poverty and tragedy, you start to see the spark of the genius she would become.
Absolutely. The sources mention one specific book that just blew her world open when she was about 13.
Hermann Hesse's Steppenwolf.
Yes. And I mean, Steppenwolf is not exactly, young adult fiction.
No, it is not.
It's a dense, philosophical, very strange novel about a man who feels he's split in two. He has his respectable human social self, and then he has this wild, lonely, wolf of the steppes nature inside him.
So why does a 13-year-old girl in Recife, Brazil,
Yeah.
connect so deeply with that?
Because she felt that split in her own life. Think about it. She was a Jewish refugee in a deeply Catholic country. She was poor, but she knew she was brilliant. She was a girl who had what was then considered a man's mind for philosophy and big ideas. She saw herself in that book, and after reading it, she said she consciously claimed the desire to write.
So it wasn't just a hobby for her.
No, it was an existential necessity. It was
Yeah.
the only way she could figure out how to integrate the wolf and the human inside her.
So the family is in Recife, but eventually, like so many people, the pull of the big city gets too strong.
In 1935, her father moves the family, Clarice and her two sisters, down to Rio de Janeiro. He was hoping for better economic opportunities and also, frankly, as was the custom, he was hoping to find good Jewish husbands for his daughters.
But Clarice had much bigger plans than just getting married. She enrolls in the law school of the University of Brazil in 1937.
Which we have to point out was an incredibly prestigious and almost exclusively male space at the time. This wasn't something young women, especially poor immigrant women, were expected to do. It puts her right at the center of the country's intellectual elite.
And she's studying law, but she's also hustling to support herself. She gets into journalism.
Right. First at the Agência Nacional, which was the government press service, and then at a major newspaper called A Noite. She's working, she's studying, she's absorbing everything.
And this is where she starts to find her people. She meets a writer named Lucio Cardoso.
A fascinating character. Cardoso was a sort of cursed poet type. He was brilliant, openly gay, which was very brave for the time, and just a complete rebel. And Clarice fell madly in love with him.
But it was a doomed romance from the start.
Romantically, yes. A traditional relationship was never going to happen. But intellectually, they were absolute soulmates. He was part of this younger generation of artists who were trying to break away from the old, stiff, formal styles of Brazilian literature. He saw her talent immediately, and he encouraged her to be weird, to be different, to be herself.
While she's navigating this complex, unrequited love with Cardoso, she also makes a very pragmatic choice. She starts dating a fellow law student named Maury Gurgel Valente.
Maury was the opposite of Lucio. He was the safe choice. He was solid, respectable, and he was about to enter Itinerary, the Brazilian Foreign Service, the diplomatic corps.
And there's a crucial detail here about her legal status.
Yes, this is really important. Clarice was a naturalized citizen, but her citizenship had certain legal caveats. And to marry a diplomat and be able to leave the country with him, she needed full, unrestricted citizenship. So as soon as she turned 21, she applied. It was granted in January of 1943, and she married Maury just 11 days later.
Wow. Talk about cutting it close. It almost feels less like a romance and more like she was securing her passport to the world.
Or at least securing her safety. You have to remember the refugee child still inside her. Marriage to a diplomat meant protection, it meant status, and meant she would never, ever be stateless again.
So she's 23 years old. She's a newlywed. She's a full citizen. And then in December of that same year, she drops an absolute nuclear bomb on the Brazilian literary scene.
That is not an exaggeration. She publishes her debut novel, Perto do Coração Selvagem, which translates to Near to the Wild Heart.
So what was the literary world like in Brazil at that moment? Why was this book such a profound shock?
Well, the dominant style at the time was something called regionalism. Think of these big, serious social realist novels. They were about the Great Drought in the Northeast, or about class struggles on plantations, or the lives of rural workers. It was all very external, very sociological, very masculine in a way.
And Clarice's book is not that.
Not even remotely. Near to the Wild Heart has almost no plot in the way people thought of plot. It's the story of a young woman named Joanna, but it's not about what Joanna does. It's about the vibration of her thoughts. It's about the feeling of being alive from one moment to the next. It's pure interior monologue.
And the critics just went absolutely ballistic.
They'd never seen anything like it. We have a quote here from the poet Ledo Ivo. He called it, and this is for a debut novel by a 23-year-old woman, the greatest novel a woman has ever written in the Portuguese language.
That's incredible.
And another major critic, Sergio Milliet, said she had penetrated the depths of the psychological complexity of the modern soul. Immediately, they all started scrambling for comparisons. They said, this is the Brazilian Virginia Woolf. This is the female James Joyce.
Because of that stream of consciousness style, obviously.
Right. It looked and felt like European high modernism. And the title itself, Near to the Wild Heart, is a direct quote from Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, so the connection seemed obvious.
But here is the part of the story that I find just so amazing and honestly kind of hilarious.
I know what you're going to say.
She hadn't read them.
It's true. She had never read James Joyce. She had never read Virginia Woolf. That title, that epigraph from Joyce, it was suggested to her by her friend, Lucio Cardoso, after he read her finished manuscript.
So he saw the connection.
He saw the similarity in spirit and said, here, use this. It fits perfectly.
That is just mind-blowing. It's like she invented the airplane in her garage without ever knowing the Wright brothers existed.
It proves that her style wasn't some academic imitation of European trends. It was organic. It came directly from her own fractured experience, her own need to express the world in a new way. She was just tapping into the same modernist frequency completely on her own.
So she's 23. She's beautiful. She's a genius. She's the toast of Rio's intellectual scene.
Yeah.
And then she's gone.
The duty of the diplomat's wife calls. In 1944, just a few months after her sensational debut, she leaves Brazil to follow her husband, Maury, on his first posting. And this begins a long, long period of exile for her.
And her first stop is not exactly a romantic European capital. She lands in Naples, Italy, in the middle of World War II.
I mean, what a jarring shift. Maury is posted to the Brazilian consulate there. Brazil had actually sent troops, the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, to fight with the Allies in the Italian campaign. So Clarice literally lands in a war zone.
And she doesn't just, sit in the consulate and arrange flowers.
No, she volunteers. She gets a job working in a military hospital, caring for the wounded Brazilian soldiers.
This image just fascinates me. The writer of the interior monologue, this woman obsessed with the abstract soul and the nuances of thought, is suddenly dealing with the most brutal physical realities: blood, bandages, amputations, death.
I think it was a vital grounding for her. It proved that her obsession with the body, with suffering, with what she called the thingness of life, wasn't just some abstract philosophical game. She saw the absolute breakage of the human body up close.
But she still managed to keep her artistic life going.
She did. While in Italy, she met the great Italian poet Giuseppe Ungaretti, and she even had her portrait painted by the famous surrealist artist Giorgio de Chirico.
And she finished her second novel, The Chandelier, during this period.
Yes, it was published in 1946. It's another very intense, very difficult book about the interior life of a girl named Virginia. The reception was respectful, but it wasn't the explosion that her debut had been. And one critic, a woman named Gilda de Mello y Sousa, wrote something about it that was incredibly prophetic.
What did she say?
She said Clarice possessed an enormous talent, but that she would have to suffer the disadvantages of that talent. Meaning, when you write this way, when you're this original, it's a lonely path. You alienate people, you're out there on your own.
After the noise and chaos of wartime Naples, the diplomatic service sends them somewhere different. Bern, Switzerland.
And if Naples was too loud, too chaotic, Bern was the polar opposite. It was too quiet.
She had a killer phrase for it.
The cemetery of sensations.
Ouch.
That's how she described Switzerland in a letter to her sisters. She fell into a deep, profound depression there. Bern was clean, it was orderly, it was prosperous, and for her, it was utterly, soul-crushingly boring.
There was no grit, no life.
None of the intensity she craved. She wrote that she lived on a street called Gerechtigkeitsgasse, which means Justice Street, and she would just stare out her window at this old medieval statue of justice and feel like she's suffocating in a museum. She said it felt like living in the Middle Ages.
The opposite of the chaos of Rio or Naples that she seemed to thrive on.
Exactly. Switzerland was too sanitized for her soul, but, as always, she wrote to survive. She wrote an entire novel there called The Besieged City.
A very fitting title for someone who felt besieged by silence.
Completely. She later said it was her least liked book, but she was also grateful to it. She said the sheer effort of writing it, of creating a world on the page, was what saved her from the appalling silence of Bern. It was her lifeline.
How did the critics in Brazil receive it?
The reception was a bit tepid. They found it hermetic, closed off, difficult to access. One critic described it as having the hermeticism of dreams, which is a beautiful phrase, but probably not a compliment in terms of sales.
And her personal life was also developing during these years of exile.
Yes, she was starting her family. Her first son, Pedro, was born in Bern. Then, after Switzerland, they had a brief, unhappy stint in Torquay in England, where she tragically suffered a miscarriage. And then in 1952, they make the big move to the United States.
Washington, D.C.
The heart of the Cold War empire. They move into a house in the suburbs in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And this is the height of the 1950s, the era of the perfect American housewife.
And Clarice Lispector, the Ukrainian refugee, the Brazilian literary genius, is now expected to play that role.
She's wearing the mask again. And this time, it's the mask of the diplomat's perfect wife. She wrote about it later with such bitterness. She said, "I gave dinner parties, I did everything you're supposed to do, but with a disgust."
You could just feel the suffocation.
It was a total trap. She was raising her sons. Her second son, Paulo, was born in Washington. But intellectually, spiritually, she was starving. She felt like her wild, wolf-like soul was being ironed flat by the suburban routine of cocktails and small talk.
It's a classic pressure cooker situation. You have this wild, existential, philosophical intellect trapped inside a world of canapes and embassy gossip.
And in 1959, that pressure cooker finally exploded. She just couldn't take it anymore. She did something incredibly brave and scandalous for a woman of her class at that time. She left her husband.
And she went home.
She took her 2 young sons, and she returned to Rio de Janeiro.
So the prodigal daughter returns. But she's coming back to a very difficult situation, right? She's a single mother now. She doesn't have the protection or the salary of the diplomatic service. She has to earn a living on her own.
It was a huge risk, personally and financially. But creatively, it was the best thing that ever happened to her. It unleashed her. The 1960s, her first decade back in Brazil, became her great renaissance. She was back in the heat, back in the noise, back in the daily rhythms of the Portuguese language. She was home.
Let's talk about the incredible work that came out of this return. First up is a collection of short stories, Family Ties, in 1960.
Laços de Familia. And honestly, if any of our listeners are looking for a place to start with Clarice, this is it. These stories are masterpieces of quiet dread.
How so?
Well, they're often set in very normal domestic spaces. A family having a birthday dinner, a woman riding a bus through the city. But in every single story, there's a moment, a tiny crack in reality where everything just snaps.
It's like she puts a mundane moment under a microscope until it becomes alien and terrifying.
That's a perfect way to put it. There's a famous story called The Imitation of the Rose about a woman trying to be the perfect housewife after a stay in a mental institution. Or another, Love, where a woman on a bus sees a blind man chewing gum, and this tiny, insignificant sight triggers a complete collapse of her entire worldview, her sense of compassion, her stable life.
And the critics at the time, they recognized this as a major leap forward.
They went wild for it. The great novelist Érico Verissimo said it was the most important story collection since Machado de Assis. And Machado de Assis is basically the Shakespeare of Brazilian literature. That's not a comparison you make lightly. Another writer, Fernando Sabino, just told her flat out it was the best book of stories ever published in Brazil.
So she's back. She's reestablished herself at the top of the literary world.
Absolutely. And then in 1961, she publishes the novel The Apple in the Dark, which is this dense, allegorical book she had actually been working on for years in England and D.C. It's about a man who thinks he's killed his wife and flees into the wilderness. It's really a book about language and creation. It won a major prize. But we have to get to the big one.
The one that really cements her reputation as this terrifyingly brilliant mystic.
The book that shocks people the most, The Passion, according to G.H., published in 1964.
Okay, let's set the scene for this, because the plot on the surface is incredibly, almost absurdly simple.
Deceptively simple. There's a woman, we only know her by her initials, G.H. She lives in a beautiful penthouse apartment in a wealthy part of Rio. She's a sculptor, she's cultured, she's idle, she's comfortable. Her maid has just quit.
And G.H. decides to go into the now empty maid's room to clean it up.
Right, and she's expecting it to be dirty, maybe a little squalid. But instead, she finds the room is starkly, strangely clean. It's like a desert. And in this clean, empty room, she opens the wardrobe.
And she sees a cockroach.
An ancient, slow-moving, prehistoric-looking cockroach.
Now, for 99.9% of humanity, the reaction is to scream, step on it, flush it, and run away.
GH's reaction is different. She instinctively slams the wardrobe door on it, and she crushes it. But she doesn't run away. She becomes mesmerized. She watches the thick, white paste, the matter of the cockroach, leaking out from its broken shell. And this sight triggers a complete philosophical and existential spiral.
And this leads to the moment, the one moment from her work that everyone talks about.
Yes, the climax of the book. In a gesture that she describes with the intensity and reverence of a religious sacrament like a priest taking the Eucharist, GH looks at the dying mass of the cockroach, and she puts it in her mouth. She eats it.
Every time I hear that, I have such a physical reaction. It's just viscerally shocking. What on earth does it mean?
It is the ultimate act of dismantling the civilized self. In that moment, GH realizes that her entire identity, her social class, her art, her beauty, her very humanity, is just a construct, a flimsy shell. By eating the most repulsive, unclean thing she can imagine, she's trying to break down the barrier between herself and the raw, pre-human, living thingness of the world. She calls it the living neutral.
So she's trying to get back to some kind of primordial state.
Yeah.
To become one with the raw matter of the universe.
Exactly. It's a mystical experience, but it's a profane one. She isn't looking up to God in heaven. She's looking down into the guts of an insect to find the divine. She strips herself down to absolute zero. It is terrifying, but for Clarice, that's where truth lived. Not in the polite dinner parties in Washington, D.C., but in the raw, abject, sacred matter of a cockroach in a maid's room.
It's just so ironic, then, that while she was writing about this total dismantling of the self, her own physical self suffered this catastrophic injury around the same time. This was in 1966.
The fire. Yes, this is a tragedy that haunted her for the rest of her life. Clarice had terrible insomnia and often took sleeping pills. And one night, she took a pill and fell asleep in her bed while smoking a cigarette.
It's the absolute nightmare scenario.
Her mattress caught on fire while she slept. She was severely burned, especially on her legs and her right hand, her writing hand. It was so badly damaged that doctors considered amputating it. She spent months in the hospital in agony and was left with these deep, angry scars for the rest of her life.
How did she describe it?
She said the initial recovery period was like spending 3 days in hell while still being alive.
And her hand. Did she ever fully recover the use of it?
Only partially. It was always stiff and painful for her to write after that. She said it changed her writing, made her mood darker, heavier. But she didn't stop. In fact, in the late 60s, she made this pivot in her career that, in a way, made her more famous than ever before.
She started writing chronicas.
Exactly. These are short weekly columns for a newspaper. She started writing them for the journal do Brasil in 1967. Now, just trying to imagine this. The woman who wrote about eating a cockroach to find God is now writing a weekly column for a mass-market newspaper right next to the sports section and the society pages.
So what was she writing about in these columns? Was it more philosophy?
It was about everything, and that was the magic of it. She'd write about conversations she had with taxi drivers, she'd give parenting advice, she'd tell stories about her childhood, she would complain about her servants. It was this incredible mix of the profound and the completely mundane.
So this is how she became a household name.
This is how she became a celebrity, because this wasn't a major daily paper. Suddenly, Clarice Lispector wasn't just for the university professors and the intellectuals anymore. Housewives, students, taxi drivers, everyone was reading Clarice on the weekend.
That made her a real public figure.
Exactly. This mysterious, glamorous, sphinx-like woman was now speaking directly to the people every Saturday, and she even started writing children's books around this time.
Wait, really? The author of The Passion According to G.H. wrote children's books.
She did. She wrote one called The Mystery of the Thinking Rabbit, which she'd actually first written in English for her son Paulo back when they lived in D.C., and my personal favorite title of all time, The Woman Who Killed the Fish.
The Woman Who Killed the Fish. That sounds like a dark confession.
It is, but it's this incredibly charming apologetic book where the narrator confesses to the children of the world that she is a bad person because she forgot to feed her son's little fish and they died. It's so funny and strange, and it just shows this whole other side of her. It completely humanized her for the public.
But she hadn't given up on the difficult, high-concept literature. In 1973, she releases what many consider her other late masterpiece, Agua Viva.
The Stream of Life. And this was a book she really struggled with. Her friend and assistant, Olga Borelli, said it was the only time she ever saw Clarice truly insecure, truly hesitate before handing a manuscript to her publisher.
Why was she so insecure about it?
Because it was so radical. It has no plot at all. There's no named narrator. It's written as a long, flowing interior monologue addressed to a mysterious you. It's pure sensation, pure flow. It's structured more like a piece of music than a novel. She was convinced it was too weird, that people would hate it and think she'd lost her mind.
And was she right?
Not even a little bit. It was instantly hailed as a masterpiece. The critics said it was the book that woke Brazilian literature from a long lethargy. It's a book you don't read for a story. You read it to feel the pulse of life itself, what she called the it.
I have to ask about one of the absolute weirdest anecdotes in the source material, the Witchcraft Congress.
Oh, yes! You absolutely cannot make this stuff up. In 1975, because of her reputation as this mystic, she gets an official invitation to attend the First World Congress of Sorcery in Bogota, Colombia.
The First World Congress of Sorcery. That sounds like something out of Harry Potter.
It got huge press coverage, and they invited her as a special guest. They even read her famously strange short story, The Egg and the Hen, aloud at the Congress. It all just added to this public image of her as this kind of beautiful, glamorous witch.
What did she think about all that?
She was actually very grounded about it. She was polite, but she publicly denied having any supernatural inspiration. She attributed all her work to unconscious elaboration, not to spirits or magic. She famously said, "I don't write in order to gratify anybody else." She was writing for herself.
We're getting close to the end of her life now, the mid-1970s. She produces two final, major works that are almost like bookends to her career. One is published posthumously, A Breath of Life.
Right, which is this fascinating dialogue between an author and his female creation, Angela Perlini. And as a recent essay by Gunther Silva Pasuni points out, it's really a book about writing as a way of continuing to breathe, of staying alive even when you're facing death.
But the other one, the last book published while she was alive, is The Hour of the Star.
And this book is a monumental achievement. By this point, her hand was so damaged from the fire that she couldn't write easily. She pieced this book together from notes scrawled on loose scraps of paper with Olga Borelli's help, and it marks this massive, final shift in her work.
How so?
Well, throughout her career, the main criticism leveled against her is that she was too abstract, too philosophical, too removed from the social reality of Brazil. But The Hour of the Star is explicitly, heartbreakingly about poverty and marginalization.
It tells the story of Macabea.
Yes, Macabea.
Mm.
She is a poor, uneducated, ugly typist from the northeastern state of Alagoas, which is right next to where Clarice's own family first arrived in Brazil. Macabea is completely lost and invisible in the huge, cruel metropolis of Rio. She barely has an interior life to speak of because she's just consumed by hunger and survival. She eats hot dogs, she dreams of drinking Coca-Cola, she's a nobody.
It feels like Clarice is looking at the ghost of a life she could have had. There, but for the grace of God go I.
That is precisely it. If her father hadn't been ambitious, if he hadn't moved them to Rio, if she hadn't fought her way into law school, she could have been Macabea. And there's a Jewish element here, too, a final nod to her origins. The name Macabea is a reference to the Maccabees, the ancient Jewish warriors. It's one of the very few times Clarice ever overtly referenced her Jewish heritage in her fiction.
It's a devastating book. It's the author, a stand-in for Clarice, looking at this insignificant person and trying, through the act of writing, to give her existence meaning and weight.
It's her final act of radical empathy.
And very shortly after The Hour of the Star was published in 1977, Clarice was hospitalized.
She had inoperable ovarian cancer. It was very advanced. The doctors didn't tell her the diagnosis, which was a common and cruel practice at the time, but she was in constant severe pain. She died on December 9th, 1977. It was the eve of her 57th birthday.
56 years old. It just seems so young for someone who lived so many different lives. The refugee, the law student, the diplomat's wife, the literary revolutionary, the public celebrity.
She was buried at the Jewish cemetery of Caju in Rio de Janeiro, leaving behind this body of work that has only grown in stature and influence ever since. She's now a part of the Penguin Modern Classics series, the first Brazilian writer to be included.
So let's try to bring this all together. Let's synthesize this incredible life. We started with that paradox, the Marlene Dietrich, who wrote like Virginia Woolf.
And I think the power of Clarice Lispector, the reason she continues to fascinate us, is that she refused to choose between those two things. She insisted on being both. She lived the life of a woman of her time, the makeup, the fashion, the children, the dinner parties, but she used her writing to insist that the interior life of that woman was as vast, as dangerous, and as philosophically profound as any epic battlefield or grand adventure.
She proved that the space inside a Rio apartment, or even just inside a maid's room, staring at a cockroach, is infinite.
Exactly. She peeled back the mundane surface of reality to show the vibrating, terrifying, beautiful thingness of life underneath it all. She validated the chaos of the human soul.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to chew on. Clarice herself said her writing wasn't magic, it was unconscious elaboration. That it came out of her almost like a scream from the soul. So if her most famous, most quintessential scene involves the intimate, mystical, and horrifying act of eating a cockroach, what does that scream say about the human condition? Maybe she's telling us that to truly find ourselves, to become whole, we can't just look at the beautiful, acceptable parts of life. We have to be willing to consume, to integrate, to become one with the very things we fear and despise the most in the world and in ourselves.
That is a disturbing but also a strangely liberating thought. It suggests that nothing is truly outside of us. We contain it all. We are everything.
We'd love to hear what stands out to you about Clarice's life. Is it the escape from Ukraine, the stifling mask of the diplomat's wife, or is it that unforgettable moment with the cockroach?
It's a lot to process, but that's Clarice for you.
It certainly is. Thanks for diving deep with us on this one.
Until next time.